Hey guys, it's NW Tutorials, and in this video I'll be showing you how to make a working taser out of a disposable camera. So to get started, you're going to need some wire, a pair of wire strippers, a pair of wire cutters, a soldering iron with its stand as well as a sponge, some solder, Gorilla Glue, a heavy object like a big book, and finally a disposable camera with a flash. I would recommend getting a Fujifilm one. Now the camera has to have a flash because a flash uses a capacitor, which is the same component that we need for the taser. Anyways, I'll link all the parts and tools you need in the description below. So once you've got all your parts together, you're going to take your wire cutters and your camera and get the wire cutters under grooves like this all around the top case so that we can take it off. And once we do that, we can access the circuit. So like I said, you want to put them under the groove in all the areas around the top case, and you'll be able to take it off. This is what it's going to look like when you've taken the case off, and you want to make sure it stays intact so we can put it back on later. These two pieces fell out when I took it off, but it should be fine because they're not crucial to how the taser works or looks. Next, we're going to want to find the capacitor so we can actually attach the wires to it. And be careful when moving the camera around, because if the capacitor has any charge in it, you could get shocked. Okay, so we know the capacitor has to be by the flash because the flash uses it. So I think it's up here so you can see, because those two wires look like capacitor wires, the ones in here. And once you find wires like those near the flash connecting to the circuit, you know that's probably the capacitor, which means it would be right up here, which it looks like it is. Okay, so we don't have to take any mechanical parts out to find it because we already did. So I looked around a bit more and found that the capacitor wires come up onto the circuit right on these two wires. So as you can see, it comes through there and comes out right here. So those are the two wires we want to attach our wire to. So I'll explain how capacitors work and why we're using them for the taser, just in case you guys are wondering. So basically, a capacitor fills up and holds charge until wires or something inductive are attached to both ends of it. So since it holds charge from the battery, it releases it all at once, and that's how we have so much power, which is great for tasing. So anyways, we want to take our wire and cut about 3 inches off. We're going to need 2 of these strips so we have both ends of the taser. So here are my wires, and as the name suggests, you're going to use your wire cutters to cut the wire. So now we're going to need to use the wire strippers to strip off both ends of this wire so we actually have some metal to solder and metal to make contact with whatever we want to tase. So we're going to use the wire strippers for this, again as the name implies, and just in case you guys don't know how to use it, I'll show you. So basically these holes are what we put the wire in to tear off the insulation on the outside so that we have metal we can use. And this, I think, so we want to find the hole that we think it'll fit in. It needs to be a little tight so we can actually cut stuff off. And this is the gauge, so I'm not sure the gauge of this wire, but I think it's 16, or, it actually looks about 20. So I'm going to put it in the 20 gauge right here, and strip off the wire. So I'm going to pull, and in my case, I don't think it's working that well. It's not really pulling anything else, so I want to go to a smaller hole so it really cuts into the wire. So I think 24 gauge. Yeah. I'll do 22 actually. So you want to clamp down and then make sure you put the strippers right at the base of where you want the wire to actually be. Rip off, and then there you go. You have your wire. So do that for both ends of all the wires and you'll be good. So here are my wires stripped. As you can see, I got the insulation off, which is great because now we actually have something to work with. So remember, we're going to have the wires soldered right about here. Yeah, exactly here on these two wires from the capacitor, like this. So next we need to get our solder. So all the things you need for the solder, you're gonna need for the solder are your sponge, soldering iron, soldering stand, solder, wires, and camera. And your sponge is important because you need to be able to clean off your iron after you solder. And your stand is also important because you need to be able to have somewhere to put your soldering iron without burning stuff. Another thing to keep in mind is that your soldering iron may take a while to heat up once you plug it in, but not too long. So I'd say wait 30 seconds max, depending on what kind of soldering iron you have. And the last thing is your temperature gauge. Since we're just melting solder, and it's not that thick, it doesn't need to be that high. So 200 Celsius is probably fine, but I usually keep mine at 300, which is what it's at right now. So first you're gonna get your wire and put it right next to the place you want to solder onto, which is one end of the capacitor. So you put it on one end, you put your soldering iron on the other end, and you make contact. And it'll start to melt the solder we already have here, and then the wire will go in. Now the reason we're not using our solder right now is because the circuit already has solder, because manufacturers or whoever made this obviously had to make connections. So we can just melt the existing solder and the wire will attach. Now you want to do that with the next wire. So now you've done it to your next wire and they're both attached where we want them to be, which is to the capacitor. But it's not that strong because we only used the solder they already had. So now it's time to use our solder because the wires are already attached. So same principle, the solder goes on one side, the soldering iron goes on the other, like this. And you want to make sure you don't melt it too much that the wire comes out. So you can make some contact with the solder to get it started, like this. And you started to melt it. Okay, the wire fell a little bit. We should be fine. Good, so we're still good. So, like I said, the wire may fall a little bit. Just make sure it doesn't fall completely out and that it doesn't touch any other conductive things on the circuit. We don't want to short circuit it. And do that to the next wire, then we'll be almost done. So once you've added more solder to both wires and there's a good connection like so, you want to clean off the soldering iron because some solder residue may be on it. So that's what where the sponge comes in. So you take it, you wipe off any solder on the sponge, and then it looks new, nice and clean. And now the next step is going to be putting the case back on in a way where we don't smash these wires, and also having the wires come out around the back so that we can just push it against something and it'll tase it. So now we want the wires to be out here so that we can actually touch things on the outside of the camera. So to do this, we need to take out some mechanical stuff so that when we put the case back on, there's room for these to flow out. And don't be careful with the mechanical stuff. We won't need it at all. It's just the electronic stuff that's important. And I want to have my wires feed through here, so I'm just going to take this off. And again, don't be careful with the mechanical pieces because they're not important to anything in this project. So I used the wire cutters to tear out some of the mechanical stuff up here. And now I can feed the wires through this hole, which is great. I was originally going to do it through here, but I figured there's a huge hole here that'd be way better. So I took out the lens and everything, and now I can feed these wires through here. Okay, so I fed the wires through the hole here, and now they're on the outside, which is what we want. Now I need to put the case back on so that it looks nice and so that whoever's using this is protected from the circuit, which might shock them. And another thing, since when I took the case off originally, a couple pieces fell out, I'm going to need to put them back in. This piece I don't think matters, so I'll throw that to the side, and this is the button. So I'm going to look at it. I think it goes in this way. So now I can put the case back on and it'll work properly. So now that the case is back on, and the button's back in here, or the switch, all I have to do is glue these wires to the bottom so that they don't fly around a lot. And another thing about how the taser works, whatever button you use to activate or to charge up the flash on a normal camera, or a switch or on a normal disposable camera, is the same switch you're going to use to charge up the capacitor. So in this case, if I push this up, it charges up the capacitor. If I push it back down, it'll stop. Hey guys, so one more tip about putting the case back on and the button is that you want to be careful that the wires aren't in the way, because with my particular camera, when the button is in the case, it needs to go under here, and the wires I soldered are blocking it, so it didn't do anything. So make sure that the wires are up and out of the way of anything you have that you actually need, like this, so that I can actually have this under here and the button will work. Alright guys, we're finally almost done. So now all we have to do is glue these wires to the back so that there's a strong connection. And we're going to get the Gorilla Glue for that. So for the Gorilla Glue, we need to first, we need to damp the surface, then put glue on it, and then clamp it, and that's why we have the book, so that we can put pressure on it, which will help it better. And it'll have a stronger bond. So to dampen it, I just took the sponge that we used with the soldering iron, and I'm just gonna kind of sprinkle it along there. Hopefully I don't get any electronics. I shouldn't. Okay, so it's wet now, and we just gotta put the glue on and clamp it. Alright guys, as you can see, I have this paper towel so that when I turn it upside down, I can put the book on it and it'll put pressure and glue won't get on the table or anything. So now just, you guys know how to glue. So just put the glue on the wires, and then I'll show you how to clamp it. Alright, so I got the glue on. Now what I'm going to do is flip it over and put it on the dampened towel, like this. And then for pressure, I have this huge electronics book. You guys can't even see the whole thing, that's how big it is. So I'm just going to put it on top of the taser and wait for it to dry. Hey guys, the glue is dry now, which means the taser is now officially done. So now we just need to test it. So for you, when charging it, you flip the switch or push the button that would normally charge up the flash in the camera, and you do that and it'll charge the capacitor, and you know it's fully charged when the high frequency noise stops getting higher. So when you start charging, there's a noise that comes on, it gets higher and higher until it stays at the same frequency, and that's when you know it's fully charged. Also on this camera, this light here will turn red, so that'll help me. And I know you guys can't hear the noise through the camera, but if you make a taser and test it, you'll know. So let me charge it up. Okay. Now it's done. So I got a piece of metal here, and let's do this. As you can see, that was a pretty big shock, so make sure that you don't shock anyone with it, because it will hurt them, even if it's not fully charged. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's our first one. We have more coming, and they do cost money, so check the link in the description. It'll bring you to our Patreon page where you can fund us, and we'll be able to make better videos that way. So I hope you guys can make your own taser successfully. I hope this helped. Bye, and I'll see you in the next video.